Sometimes I send you stuff. We would like to welcome you here today to our Municipal Council meeting. We are convened at 5:31 in the City Center Municipal Council chambers, 351 West Center. We're going to change our order just a little bit here from our normal, and we will begin with a roll call. Cliff Strachan.
Ryan Jones.
Dave Sewell.
Kay Van Buren.
George Handley.
Gary Winterton.
David Harding.
Dave Connect.
George Stewart.
Wayne Parker.
We have invited Mr. Parker to say our invocation, and we appreciate Chief Miguel being here to lead us in the pledge.
Our Father in heaven, we gather before Thee this evening in the form of a municipal council meeting for the city of Provo, grateful for the community in which we live and the freedoms that we enjoy, grateful for this strong and capable community. Father, we are, as we gather this evening, our hearts are broken at the loss of our friend and brother Joe Shinners as he was killed in the line of duty earlier this week. We invite Thy peace and comfort to be with his family and friends and our department, the brothers and sisters of the police department and the fire department and law enforcement, people everywhere who have expressed their sympathy and condolences. We recognize that we have lost a great public servant and an important part of our city workforce and our police department. We pray now that the discussions of this evening will be in accordance with Thy will, that it will be we'll be able to do things which will work to the advantage of our broader Provo community and will strengthen the quality of life that we enjoy here. We invoke Thy blessing and Spirit to be with us this evening in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Would the audience please stand and join me in allegiance to the United States of America? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated.
Before we begin other business of the evening, it was our desire as a council to take a moment and express our heartfelt sympathies to a family member here in our community. On the evening of Saturday, January 5th, Officer Joseph Shinners of Provo City Police Department was tragically killed in the line of duty. It's the first homicide of a Provo City police officer since 1890, and the first line of duty death in this nation this year. Our hearts are heavy tonight with the loss of Officer Shinners. In the hours since his tragic death, we have heard many stories of this great man. It's clear that he was devoted to service in every area of his life and was loved by all. His 3 years of service to our police department made a big impact, and we support Chief Ferguson in posthumously promoting Officer Shinners to Master Officer. We extend our deepest sympathies to his family, especially his wife, Caitlin, and his son, Logan. No words that we can say will ever be enough. But we want them to know that we do love them, and they are in our prayers. Our police officers and their spouses are grieving at this terrible loss. They are family too. All of us here have the highest respect for our police department. We are so grateful for them and for the difficult work that they do, for the sacrifices they make to keep our community safe. We have been fortunate in Provo to have these type of events be very rare, but even one is way too many. We will never forget this tremendous sacrifice that each one of you make for us. Thank you. To everyone who has stepped up to help and show support, we thank you also. There will be a vigil tomorrow night at 7 p.m. in front of the police headquarters. We also invite the community to bid farewell to Officer Shinners on Saturday. His funeral will be at 11 o'clock at the Utah Valley University UCCU Center. Afterward, there will be a procession to his final resting place in Mapleton. We encourage everyone who is able to line the streets and line the route of this procession. More details of the route will be given on our Facebook page as it becomes more secure. We appreciate all of you being here. We appreciate the support of the community. This is hard on our community, and we will get through this. We will become stronger because of the experience. We will be closer together, and we're grateful for each of you who continue forward. Mayor, I know you're just arriving. I hate to put you on the spot like this, but do you have something you would like to say at this time?
I was talking this morning and I had a gentleman call me and tell me, wow, since you've been mayor, you have had a lot. And I didn't even care about me, but I went right to the police department and thought, since Chief Ferguson's been chief, he's had a lot. Things that probably some chiefs will never have to even address in their whole tenure. So anyways, because it's such an emotional thing for me, and this has just been so heartbreaking, I found that if I write the words and read them, it's just better for me. So just bear with me. Just a few thoughts. What a good man Officer Joseph Shinners was. He was someone who brightened people's days. Throughout his life, he was esteemed by his peers and by those who mentored him, whether it was his high school soccer coach or his leaders on the police force. There have been many red eyes among his police colleagues over the last few days. To me, the tears are evidence of the tender bond these officers feel for Joe and his family. Joe lived his values. He set aside other pursuits to serve a mission in El Salvador. He married his sweetheart, Kaylin. He was a devoted dad to their young son. He obtained an education with the goal of becoming a public servant. And in his career, he exemplified the real meaning of that phrase, public servant. Let me repeat a story you may have heard from Chief Ferguson. Officer Shinners had arrested a man and was about to take him into custody. He asked the man if he needed anything. The man apparently looked at Joe and said he needed a hug. Joe honored his request. When I heard this story, my question is, would the arrested man have asked for a hug from just anyone or just any officer? Well, we'll never know for sure, but I like to think that the man sensed the same thing that our whole community is coming to sense, that there was something special about Officer Joseph Shinners.
Thank you, Mayor. We would like to take a standing minute of silence at this point. So we would invite those that can or are capable, would you please stand, and we will recognize Officer Shinner. Thank you. Joe, we will miss you. A bit of a challenge, but we will now move on to the other portions of our meeting today. We will begin with the approval of minutes for November 13th council meeting, November 20th Board of Canvassers meeting, and December 11th council meeting. Are there any additions or changes to those minutes? Seeing none, we will approve them by acclamation. Move to item number 5. This will be presented by Dustin Graybaugh and backed up by the rest of the finance department. Dustin.
Thank you, members of the council. Today we have the privilege of presenting to you the popular annual financial report. There's just a couple sentences I'd like to highlight on the letter that is on the 3rd page of the PAFR, as we refer to it. It says, the purpose of the PAFR is to illustrate the city's financial information in a clear, concise manner, giving all readers, both financial and non-financial, the understanding of where the revenues come from and where the dollars are spent. Most importantly, it is essential that our citizens understand the key services that the cities provide to make Provo a safer, more enjoyable place in which to work, live, and play. The PAFR is a summarized version of the comprehensive annual financial report, the CAFR, which is a much larger document. This document, while abbreviated, has much of the same information at a higher level. What we would hope is that this might be a good place for anyone, if they are interested in looking at the city's finances, to start, that you might be able to look at it and find some questions that you could then refer to the actual CAFR, both of which are available on our website under City Departments, Finance, Financial Reports. You can find both of these documents there now. We anticipate that after reading the PAFR, community members will be reassured that public dollars are being used to build a better, safer, and stronger Provo. I feel confident that we are wise stewards of the money that we have been allocated, and we accomplish much with the resources that we have. Kelsey Zarbach, one of the accountants in our office, is going to go through some of the specific details in the PAFR just to highlight a few items.
Good evening. It's good to be with all of you tonight. As Dustin mentioned, the PAFR is a simplified version of the CAFR, and it also provides some information that the citizens might find interesting. For example, if a citizen is wondering what's been going on in Provo, significant events in the past fiscal year, they could go to page 5 and see a list of 4 significant events, including the UVX construction, Duncan Aviation construction, Woodside Capital beginning to revitalize East Bay Shopping Center, and Wasatch Educational acquiring 21 acres of the East Bay Golf Course to build a medical school in the future. So it's not just financial information, it also includes statistical information, but as Dustin mentioned, it does have a lot of information contained in the CAFR at a higher level. So if a citizen wants to simply know where the general fund money goes, a citizen could go to page 9 of the PAFR and find that the largest general fund expenditures go to police at 17%, followed by Parks and Rec at 17%, and then fire at 16%. Sorry, police was 30%. There, on page 10, citizens will find information about the general fund balance. That continues to grow. The unassigned fund balance is an indicator of the amount of available resources the city has in the event of an emergency, and that amount is also increasing in the past fiscal year. So that's one of those references that citizens can look to and know that the city's in good financial condition. Finally, with the Provo City Center being rebuilt in the future and the new public safety facilities, that bonding process, some citizens might want to compare Provo City's property tax to how much property tax they're paying to other entities, such as the county or the school district. On page 12, there's a breakdown of what those percentages are for a taxpayer. And so overall, the PAFR is a good financial resource for citizens who just want that higher level information. Again, they can always go back to the CAFR if they want more detail. And that's pretty much the purpose of the PAFR. Any questions for us? Mr. Sewell? The first page, it's, yeah, the first page of the PAFR. Yeah, government. Yeah, GFOA. Yes, that's correct.
Sorry, my mic wasn't on. So I just wanted to say thank you for the excellent work on this financial report. It's very easily digestible and understandable, I think, for the average citizen. And I just wanted to call attention to the fact that it's so well done that we've won an award for that.
Thank you, yeah. And this current PAFR for the 2018 fiscal year is, has been submitted to GFOA for, hopefully we'll get another award for this one. So thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate receiving this today, and I'm sure that the community will appreciate it also. We'll now move to the public comment portion of our meeting, and Brian, will you lead us into that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As indicated on the screen, a required public hearing will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. Looks like we've got one of those. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. I'm going to actually skip most of the rest of this, though, because I don't think it applies. At this time, 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. During this public comment period, each speaker will be generally limited to 2 minutes. During item number 10, additional time may be given to individuals specifically invited to speak, such as applicants, neighborhood chairs, or others that may be representing additional persons. Please begin your comments by stating your name and city of residence. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Those with comments are invited to approach the podium.
Seeing no one approaching the podium, we will then close the public portion of this comment, and we will move on to item number 6. We will have the election of municipal council officers, a chair and a vice chair for the year 2019. This time we will open the floor for nominations for chair of the Provo Municipal Council. Mr. Stewart.
I nominate David Harding. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, we will call for a vote, and we ask only for affirmative votes at this point. Those in favor, please indicate. That passes unanimously. We will then now call for nomination for a vice chair for the Provo Municipal Council. Mr. Sewell.
Excuse me. I'd like to nominate Kay Van Buren as vice chair.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, we will close the nominations for vice chair and call for a vote. Those in favor? That passes unanimously. This time, then, we will turn the time over to, we do have to do the resolution. Thank you. We have an implied motion on the table, and that would be a resolution acknowledging the election of the chair and the vice chair for the Provo Municipal Council for the year 2019. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing Mr. Stewart.
So you want a second, you said?
No, just any discussion.
Excuse me.
Okay, then we will call for a vote on that resolution. Those in favor? That passes unanimously. And with that being done, we will turn the microphone and podium over to our new chair, Mr. Harding. And Mr. Van Buren will switch here.
Thank you, Mr. Strachan. And I thank my fellow council members for their vote of confidence, and I commit that we will do our best to forward the purposes of the council, and we'll do our best to allow the council to serve the people of Provo to the best of our abilities. So, thank you.
Wanted to express thanks to Gary for his service, excellent service as chair, I think, and you as well, Mr. Harding, for your service as vice chair. I thought last year was a wonderful, for me as a new member of the city council, it was as smooth as I could have hoped it to be, and I know it was great, mostly due to your excellent service, so thank you very much.
It was Mr. Stewart.
Certainly would like to second what George said. The two Georges are in agreement. It's been a wonderful year for the council. Under great leadership. Leadership makes a difference, and it's been my best year on the council. So I thank you for your leadership.
I'd like to third that.
Thank you for those thoughts. I heartily agree. I really appreciated being able to serve with Mr. Winterton. He's become a great friend and has aptly led the council. In addition to leadership, it also our relationship with the administration, the mayor, and we get to serve with such capable and caring individuals. It's wonderful. And that also goes for our staff. Cliff is our executive director, but also the whole council staff. And there's so many that we interact with, and that's why we're able to do the things that we do for the people of Provo.
It says here we have a presentation from Cliff of some gifts, or?
Yes, would outgoing vice chair and new chair, Mr. Harding, and outgoing chair, Mr. Winterton, join me at the podium. So, council members and members of the public, it's traditional that we offer the outgoing chair and vice chair a gift, and most years they get to choose their own, and this year they did accordingly. I would like to say one of the themes that the city right now is studying is leadership under the mayor's guidance, And this year, right now, we're reading a book called Leadership in Turbulent Times. And in that book, Doris Kearns Goodwin, who I've had the opportunity to meet, I think Wayne has, she wrote about the leadership of various presidents, including Presidents Johnson, Abraham Lincoln, and both the Roosevelts. And there's a quote, I think, that's very apropos, given the conversations I've had with both of you in the last couple of weeks, and it's about the element of service and the passion you feel about what you do. And she writes, more and more, it seems to me that about the best thing in life is to have a piece of work worth doing and then do it well. And on behalf of the staff, and I speak for the council, you've done well, so thank you. What they've actually selected is pictures. Right now it's got the council in it, but we've done a portrait of the two of them together, and they've each selected a thank you again. Oh, I got it wrong.
I thought mine was black because that was my house.
Anyway, will you take a picture with me?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, council.
Mr. Harding, could I take 1 second?
Please, Mr. Winter.
The reason this is such a special place is because there are such special people here. And I'm grateful for the opportunity I've had to work with each one of you. This is the hardest thing, is when you lose an opportunity to serve, you also lose contact with the people that you grow to love. And I am so grateful for the opportunity I've had to work and get to know you. And I appreciate the hard work and the attitudes that you have. And I especially appreciate your friendship. That is what I will always remember, is that we serve. And I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
There's no objection. We will now recess as the Municipal Council and reconvene as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo by unanimous consent. Turn the time over to our current RDA chair, Mr. Smith.
Thank you. We now have a call for nominations for the chair of the RDA for the next year, for 2019. Dave?
I'd like to nominate Dave Connect.
Thank you. Any other nominations? Seeing none, we'll close nominations and ask for a vote. All in favor? Would appear to be unanimous. Thank you. And now we would like to call for nominations for vice chair of the RDA. Oh, sorry, George.
I'd like to nominate George Hanley.
George Hanley has been nominated. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, we will close nominations and vote. All in favor of George Hanley? The voting is unanimous. Let's see. Now we have a resolution before us acknowledging the appointment of the chair and vice chair of the Redevelopment Agency of Provo for the calendar year 2019. And being as it's an implied motion, unless there's any discussion, we can vote on that. All in favor? And the voting is unanimous. I now turn the meeting back over to, well, no, I'm reading this. That's funny. I turn the outgoing RDA chair turns the meeting over to the newly elected RDA chair. That's great. So,
Chair Connect?
Yes.
If I may, I'd like to thank both the outgoing RDA chair and the outgoing RDA vice chair for their service and apt leadership of the RDA board, and just offer my sincere thanks. And also to the incoming RDA chair and vice chair for your willingness to serve.
Well, I think George and I are excited. This is a special time. There are real great needs to be addressed in the community, and it's a real opportunity. So do we need to adjourn as the RDA? Do we have a motion to adjourn as the RDA?
You don't need you can just do that by common consent.
Okay. By common consent, we are adjourned as the RDA board, and we'll reconvene as Provo City Council.
So I have been passed a note that we have a couple of citizens here that would like to make an open public comment. Did not understand the process as we went through it. Are there any objections by the council if I were to reopen public comment at this time? Seeing none, we will reopen public comment and invite any in attendance who would like to use their 2 minutes to now approach the podium. And remind you to please state your name and city of residence at the beginning.
Good evening. Thank you for reopening. I'm Alex Martinez.
I'm Francesca Lopez.
We're both residents of Provo. We are representatives from a student-led rally in Provo called Women's Wave Rally Provo. I'm going to read our mission statement. Women's Wave Rally Provo is a student-led rally that encourages women to use their voices to tell their stories, vote, lobby, be active in the community, and be good allies to sexual assault survivors. As a sister event of the National Women's March, we come together to harness the power of diverse women and allies with intersectional identities to create social change in Utah County. We strive to help the community become more aware of the extent of sexual assault in Utah. We have partnered with local organizations with similar goals so that together we can promote change and empower women. Women's Wave Provo calls upon local and state leaders to listen to and believe women. Our event will be on January 19th, next Saturday, starting at 10 a.m. at Pioneer Park, just over there.
We're hoping to extend an invitation to any council members who would like to attend. We'd like for you to come, and then as the rally begins, we'd acknowledge your presence and show the community how invested we are in the city council.
We have a few speakers lined up. One of our speakers that we're really excited about is Angela Romero. She's a representative of District 26 in Salt Lake, and various others, and we would be grateful to have you in attendance if you're able to make it. We'll leave some flyers out on the table so you can have all the information. But thank you again.
Thank you. And if there's no others who would like to take the opportunity for this extended open public comment, we will now move on. I'm now on the wrong page. All right, so we will now consider a resolution of intent to establish a parking permit program in the Pleasant View neighborhood. And this will be presented by our own Bryce Mumford.
That's the second day you've been Brian, isn't it? Sorry.
It's a great name.
We often joke you can just call us Bryson.
Bryson.
Thank you very much, Chair and Council, Mayor. I come before you. Austin Taylor had a prior commitment. He would have been here tonight to present this, and so I wanted to give you just a brief background on this proposal. The designation process for putting together a permit parking area is dictated by Provo City Code, Chapter 9.80, specifically Section 070. And in September, you may recall, there was a public hearing that the council held to determine the level of interest for this permit parking area. Well, subsequent to that, we went back and we looked, and although the Pleasant View permit parking area was done in accordance with the code at the time in 2004, it was never formally codified. And so therefore, this proposal is to codify what was not the area that has been working but has not been codified, and to expand that to include some other areas. And so the boundaries proposed by the parking committee are from Lambert Lane, from University Parkway, extending north to 1800 north. And I have a map. I can pull that up real quick. 500 east, again, from University Parkway north to 1763 north. 650 east from University Parkway to north to where the road actually ends. And Andrus Lane from 650 east and northward to where that road actually ends as well. The restrictions are as follows: that motor vehicles won't be parked more than 2 hours, except by permit, from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Andrus Lane and 650 East. And I think throughout the whole area. We'll have to just double check that before we send this out to residents. And then that specifically on, I think, 650 East, there it is, because the street's too narrow, that the vehicles only park on one of the sides, the east side, or the west side, excuse me. And so those are the restrictions that the committee came up with. The permit cost and the permit type are as seen on the screen. The permit cost is $15 per vehicle, and the permit type is going to be if you're interested in a pass, we're going to do it by license plate reader. So you go online and you put in the license plate of the vehicles that you're interested in putting a permit on. And the planned enforcement method is regular enforcement, and it's our understanding that Paul Evans would like to modify this somehow. And so as we work through those details, we'll work with Paul Evans to try and figure this out. And finally, the timeline for implementation is once it's passed, we would give the residents a little bit of time to register their vehicles and begin enforcement immediately. So those are the details, and I'll slip over to my desk, and Brian Jones can also answer any questions that the council may have. But this is scheduled for a public hearing, and so we need to open it up to them as well. But I'm also available for questions, and I'll go pull up that map.
Before you go, are we in the middle of a process here? Can you explain the process of what we're doing?
Yeah, so on September 11th, we had that public hearing to determine the level of interest. The council determined that there was sufficient level of interest to move this forward to the parking committee. The parking committee then has 90 days to review those, the aspects that I just covered with you, and to provide a recommendation to the council. These were put in your materials, I think, under Exhibit B, and a similar document will be sent out to all the residents affected by this if the council approves to go forward. And so tonight's action is a resolution of intent. So basically you're stating to the area at large that you are intending to put a permit parking area in place. There will be a follow-up set of 2 public hearings where we'll have the community will have an opportunity to come and to, I kind of got thrown off by that, but the community will have a chance to come and to share what they like, what they don't like about the permit parking area. Maybe they're opposed to the cost. And so this is simply a resolution of intent signifying to that area that you're intending to put a permit parking area in place. 30 days from now on the February, well, not 30, but 27 days from now, on February 5th, we'll have the first of 2 public hearings to codify this area. And so that's essentially the process, is that we are right in the middle of it. This is the time where we say we're going to move forward with this, and we'll have 2 public hearings where you'll have an opportunity to hear from the public and determine whether you'd like to codify that.
Question?
Mr. Stewart.
I'm assuming that the permits are only for residents of the area.
Yes.
It doesn't say that.
Yeah, we probably better clarify that too.
Thank you.
Can I weigh in, Mr. Harding? Chair Harding? What's that?
So please.
Oh, I thought you pointed at someone else. I'd also just raise a couple of, I guess, procedural / logistic issues with this particular application. It's a little bit of an interesting situation because the original permit area was created under a different ordinance than now exists. So back in 2003, when, well, late 2002, when Chapter 19.80 of the code was first implemented, it had a completely different designation process than we have now. That designation process was that an applicant applied to the mayor, who directed that a study be done and made a recommendation to the council about whether the permit area should be created or not. And then the council had authority under that statute to create the permit parking area by resolution, not by ordinance, which is a little bit odd because it doesn't actually create a codified law. It's technically, resolutions are usually reserved for administrative actions rather than for legislative actions. So since that time, the law has changed, the city code regarding the designation process has changed, and it now says that permit parking areas are created by ordinance. So you have a resolution that was passed in 2004 that creates the original area, but we now have a code that requires permit parking areas to be created by ordinance. My recommendation for reconciling the two is if you do end up deciding as a council to expand the area, that you do so by passing an ordinance that codifies in our city code the entire parking permit area, including the original area. Now that may or may not raise some flags or some concerns for the residents, because I think there's been kind of an understanding that the previous permit area was only enforced by request, and our default for passing an ordinance for these permit parking areas is that they are on the books, they are in code, and the police department patrols and enforces as they see fit. So that's one issue to be aware of as you go forward with considering putting this into code. But I don't really see any way to do it logistically or procedurally other than that, unless what the neighborhood is really asking for is just for the city to put up signs. And if all they're asking for is to put up signs with no enforcement, then that's really an administrative action rather than a legislative action. So that may be one question you're going to want to clarify with the residents as we move forward through the process.
Are there any other questions for either Mr. Mumford or Mr. Jones? I have a little question. Okay, Mr. Van Buren.
Mr. Mumford, the map you have up, can you explain just the extensions?
The extensions? Are you talking about the roads?
We've had a parking permit program that's been in place. We're going to make it a little bigger, then codify the whole thing. So I was just trying to.
So the part that has been in place is the part that's on the west, the two streets that make the kind of the wishbone,
Gotcha.
And the part that's on the east is the new part that we'll be adding. So,
thank you.
And I thought I'll enhance this map, and Austin had used red lines, and now I see why he used red lines, because my highlighter covered up the names of the streets so you can't see them, so I apologize.
How about the special events? Does this, for this program, is this part of, are we enforcing during special events? First football, basketball games, homecoming spectacular, and?
It was indicated to me 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday, 2-hour parking. Other than that, I don't know.
So that would be something else that could be addressed. There is, in our two existing code chapters that create permit parking areas, there's a section in each one of those that grants some exceptions. In both those sections right now, those exceptions are holidays, Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, things like that. You could theoretically add something else or rely simply upon the fact that the parking permit program would not be in place on Saturdays under its current terms. So that's just another factor to consider.
Yeah, and is that something that the council would be interested in? I think would also be a consideration. So.
And I'd be interested in the intent of the neighborhood. What is the intent for this? Is it to protect during the weekday when the students are at school so they don't have to pay a parking fee at BYU? Or is it actually to keep people off the streets during ball games and things? So I think as we hear from the neighborhood, that'll be helpful.
Yeah.
Mr. Connect? Okay. I have two, I don't know who the best, which of the Bryson is best to answer this, but the kind of the two things that I'm curious about is, if my understanding, this is kind of the second of a three-step process. 3 times we go to the public to create these. Is there any concern that the original part was not part of the first? Do we need to go back and repeat that first step, or are we comfortable that moving to the second, or adding this in at the second step is okay?
Given that it already exists by resolution, I mean, I think that the existence of the part that is already there followed the process that existed at the time. So I think that's fine. I think, so here, let me give you a shorter answer. I think that it's fine to just move the entire process forward with the new area as long as we follow the noticing requirements for the entire area and not just for the expanded area. So when we come up with the text of the actual code language that is proposed to be inserted, and Bryce and I have already talked about this, my suggestion would be it needs to be sent to the residents of the entire area, not just the expansion area.
Thank you. And then the second concern, Mr.
Finish your questions. I've got something for you.
Okay. The second concern that I have is, this is a resolution of intent. And so I guess my concern is reading the parking committee's proposal versus what was listed by the neighborhood chair who was requesting it seems to be quite at odds. And so to state that we intend to enforce regularly, for example, but there's probably 3 or 4 other things that didn't coincide. Is that, I guess I'm a little bit concerned saying this is our intent, we're going to do this, and it might either really excite people because, oh boy, this is not what we were signing up for, and unduly alarm them, or that some people may look at that and say, oh, good, that's what I want, and then we surprise them at the end and say, oh, just kidding, we're actually not going to do that. So I'm a little bit worried that this is a 3-step process in order to communicate very well to the public, and it seems like we're saying, well, we say we're going to do this, but we're actually going to do this over here.
Well, I think that raises a good point, and which is, I think, part of the reason why Bryce and I talked yesterday about reaching out to the neighborhood and seeing if they even wanted to go forward. I think you've got 2 options at this point as the council. One option is to say, it is our intent to consider putting in place a plan, and we are delegating to staff to come up with what the details of that plan are, to send that plan out in accordance with the ordinance to all of the affected residents, and to hold a public hearing in which they will then come in and respond to what's been sent out, recognizing that if that public feedback inspires any changes, we can direct staff to go make those changes before we formally approve it. Option number 2 is for the council to say, we want to have a little bit more ownership of it, and we actually want to see what is going to be sent to the residents before it's sent out. So we're not actually going to pass the resolution of intent tonight. We're going to make, by motion, direct staff to go prepare the actual code draft and bring it back to us, at which point we would pass a resolution of intent to send out that language when the council is satisfied with it. It really is just a matter of when it's a policy question of when the council wants to stick their toe into the water and their fingers into the pot and dabble with the code provisions.
Mr. Chair, Council, the applicant is unable to be here tonight, but he sent an email to you about an hour and a half ago. And let me read from it. It says, first, thank you to the council and city staff who have worked to bring the Pleasant View neighborhood parking program to this point in the process. There are 5 major steps that need to occur as detailed, kind of, in code. Tonight, the council will determine if step 3, a resolution of intent to consider a parking permit program sometime in the future, and only after public notice and mailings to property owners should be passed. The process is complicated by the existence of the Pleasant View Neighborhood Permit Parking Program that was enacted by the Municipal Council in 2004 by Resolution 85 under a previous version of code. This complication has been known since the first communications in August 2018. Since the action by the council in September 2018 on the expansion of the program, there has been no discussion on the language that should codify the permit parking program under 2019 code, and there has been one phone call yesterday about a need to include the existing program under the new code. In the next few months, if staff are ready, I believe these issues can be addressed and resolved before coming back to the council for review and possible final approval. We have waited for the maximum prescribed days for review of the proposed program before coming back to the council as tonight for a resolution to further proceed. Please pass a resolution of intent and let the neighborhood move forward to the next steps. Otherwise, we'll be no closer to a program than we were in September 2018. Whatever the concerns or issues, they must all be resolved before coming back to the council in step 5. Stating the issues in the resolution will help to identify what must be addressed so that we're able to come back with the unified code language and all mailings and public meetings completed. Cheers, R. Paul Evans, Chair, Provo City Pleasant View Neighborhood.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion before we open this to the public? First, we would open it to the Pleasant View Neighborhood Chair, who is...
We just heard.
Or his designee.
I think he sent a proxy.
Excellent. Please share your name and city of residence.
My name is Rich Ziegler. I'm a Provo resident, and I am one of about 6 co-chairs. And so I'm here to reinforce what Paul has already stated in the email and maybe address a couple of the questions that the council has raised in their discussion. First of all, I think it was asked about the time and events and conflicting with events. Most events are outside the Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. window of time that's in question. And I believe that exception, I'm not super familiar with the way the permit program was originally enacted, but that's kind of been an understanding that events are an exception. So that could possibly be part of what's codified when the ordinance is put together. And I think Paul already addressed in his email, but I think it makes sense to expand and you know, the old program was set up and the law was changed and it's kind of just out there in limbo. Now, honestly, under the, I don't believe anyone has been able to even purchase a permit. There used to be a little sticker that you put in your window of your vehicle, and I don't think the parking office has been set up to even issue those stickers for a long time. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that just the fact that the signs are there has essentially accomplished the aims of the program. The parking enforcement has not been active in actually patrolling the area. If there is an issue, we'll make a phone call, and we generally watch out as neighbors. I think Paul would reiterate that, you know, in general, you know, we look out for each other, and as the you know, as the program runs, the signs are just a deterrent for those that are the outsiders coming in and parking. But it does make sense to update the old part of the program if we're going to do it. That certainly makes sense. I think Paul has pretty much addressed all of the talking points that are in there. The issue that we generally try to, as a neighborhood, be good neighbors to each other and those around us. And I think this whole issue is kind of stemmed from our neighbor, our big institutional neighbor that has not cooperated and communicated with their employees that parking is you know, not that we would hope that they wouldn't clog up the streets with parking, and that's why the issue has been brought forth. But in the end, we're just trying to move through the process. I think all of the residents on 650 East and Andrus Lane, the new area, I think it's a unanimous, I think there's a list of signatures that all support it, but I would venture to say, and I live on 500 East, that those of us on 500 East would support this program as well. If we wanted a permit now, that gives us an option to actually pay for and get a permit. I don't think there will be much objection to that, but I believe all of those details in that part, as the process continues, can be brought out. But I think the neighborhood will be overwhelmingly supportive of moving forward with this. So just to kind of echo Paul's email that, yes, we would really hope for a resolution to continue the process.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. If you'll pause for just one moment, I don't know if anyone else has a question. I have a quick question for, when talking about the exception, are we saying that we're going to make an exception, meaning that it's no parking between 7 and 4 and on big events, or are we saying if there's a big event, we're going to make an exception so that people can park on the street? Which way are we talking
I
about for that
believe
exemption?
that's when a big event is going on. Now, maybe that's kind of ambiguous because big event can mean lots of different things, whether it's a graduation or a women's conference or a basketball game, or not many basketball games or football games, sporting events operate during that time. But BYU has been gracious, and maybe this is something to clarify in the code, but during conferences and things that are during the day, they generally do put up signs that say, please do not park here, not event parking. So maybe there isn't a really big need for an exception, but that's something I think to kind of iron out as the process goes forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, appreciate it. And with that, we will open up the public comment to anyone else who would like to speak to this item.
I'm Jaylyn Evans. I want to thank all of you for your service that you give the community. I've never done this before. This is so scary to me, but I know each of you. We are not intending to limit parking for events at BYU. That is not the intent at all. And most of the events do happen before 4. And whenever they do happen, it's just all the neighbors embrace it and just plan their day around those events. And so this is not an intent to try to limit parking during those events. It's just the everyday students and employees that are parking. And since the original parking program, it made the neighborhood so much easier to get around and live in. And so I just ask that you support the continued discussion about this. And I don't know if you have any other questions, but okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Evans.
Pam Jones, one of the vice chairs of Edgemont neighborhood. I used to know some people who lived on Andrus Lane near the far end. They had a large family, but all of them are grown and gone. They had a lot of friends and a lot of parties and things, and it was always very difficult to go there because Andrus Lane just doesn't have room for parking on both sides. And I can fully see why the residents would want to have the restrictions. A lot of BYU events happen in the evenings. But mostly I have a question, that is, why is there a $15 charge for the permit to allow people to park in front of their own houses? How much does a sign cost? And is that $15 a year or one time or what?
Me respond?
Please,
Chairman,
Mr.
thank
Parker.
you. So when the permit parking was codified back in 2005, 6, somewhere in that ballpark, one of the prevailing feelings on the part of the council was that the taxpayers in general should not subsidize the cost of a parking permit program because we're restricting their right to their streets. And so the residents who wanted to have the control of the taxpayer-owned streets should pay for the privilege of doing that. And so the $15 amount was calculated based on the cost of installing and maintaining signs over an extended period of time. So the signs have to be replaced, they get knocked over, they get weathered. And so based on the spacing of the signs required in the manual on uniform traffic control devices and the life cycle of the sign, $15 per permit was kind of established as the baseline number. We never attempted to recover the cost of printing the permit. It was really about the cost of regulating and enforcing the signage that's there. So that was, again, it was an average number across large swaths, and this is exactly the same fee that's applied in every other parking permit program in the city.
I see 3 entrance spots for those streets.
Yep.
How much does it cost for a pole and a metal sign?
It's about $300 to install the sign and the pole.
And how long would that last?
I don't remember. It's been years since we looked at it. My guess is it's more expensive now than when we looked at it the last time. But that it was just an average number across the annual operation and maintenance cost of the program.
Okay, and then how often do the residents pay the $15?
So they pay annually. It's a 1-year fee.
Well, hold on. So I'd just like to clarify, we were hearing that there have not been permits issued. The people are just basically looking at the signs and obeying the law. And so it seems like permits are optional. If you want to park on the street in that time frame, you buy a permit. Otherwise, you don't. So it's not like every resident is going to get charged this money. And right now, if they're not issuing any permits, then actually no one's going to pay any money. If someone actually wanted to, for a guest or for whatever reason, to park on the street during this time frame, then they would pay the $15, which covers an enforcement officer coming up there occasionally. Usually it would appear on request of the neighborhood, but it takes time and money to actually enforce it, not just to put the signs up.
Yeah, and I think part of the difficulty too is, while each parking permit program has its unique series of choices, we always put that on the sign. But the less uniform we make these, the harder it is to administer. And so we try to keep a few things relatively constant, like the permit fee, like the spacing of the signs, like the cost associated with the signs. But again, if you look at University Gardens, the standards are a little different there than they are in Foothill, which are a little different than they are in Pleasant View. And again, we now have a proposal we're evaluating, helping the Joaquin neighborhood craft to prepare to submit to the council, and that will be different yet again. But again, the less uniform we make them, the more difficult and tricky the enforcement is. And again, we ask our enforcement officers to enforce. But again, if it's not really on the sign, it's pretty difficult for them to know exactly what every ground rule is in every specific neighborhood.
So, Mr. Sewell, is your question for Mrs. Jones?
Just a comment.
Okay, if it's all right, I'm going to close the public comment portion, and then we'll bring it back for all right, thank you for that. Thank you, Ms. Jones. And Mr. Strachan.
Just wanted to add, in terms of the cost also includes the city's administration costs to do the program. In other words, staff time.
Thank you. If I see no other public comment,
Can't do it.
it's our protocol is to only allow one comment per person but please feel free to contact any of us after the meeting, and I'm willing to stay after and chat a little bit more if you'd like.
I just had a comment. Pam, one of the reasons that we do is that these are public streets, and I think sometimes we get confused at thinking that parking in front of our home is our parking, and it's not. It's a public street, and by having a parking program, we are limiting the public and giving the people a right to use that more restrictively, and they should pay something for that. It's like coming downtown, we have parking meters, and we have to pay. We pay for those parking meters at some point in certain cities. Certainly we don't in Provo, but you pay for the use of public property. And that's what we're doing. We're asking them to charge just a little bit, just for the maintenance and the enforcement of helping those people get a little bit more of a right.
All right, Mr. Stewart.
Also, Pam, the people that pay this fee ask for the program. We don't mandate we have parking permit programs. They say we want this program, and all we're saying is, well, it's fine, we're willing to put a program into effect, but there's some cost that we'd like you to cover.
All right, I'd like to remind the council that we have an implied motion on a resolution of intent to establish a permit parking program in the Pleasant View neighborhood. And it sounds to me like our biggest decision point is do we want proposed language before we issue this resolution of intent? And it appears that the residents would like us to move forward even if the language that is proposed from the parking committee may not be what ends up in the final one, but they're urging us to move forward. But I guess that's perhaps the biggest question before us. Do we want to hold off until we have some draft language, or if we want to move forward? Invite any discussion.
I'd like to support the residents' desire to move forward to the next step.
I feel the same.
Will we see the final language? So there'll be another, before this goes in place, we'll be able to vote on the language that's actually written, right?
Right, and the code requires you to hold another public hearing before you actually approve the language. So it's just a question of whether you want to see it before that public hearing even happened, before the residents are even notified of that public hearing, or if you want to review it at the same time that the public is addressing it. Now, in reference to Mr. Evans' comments in the email, I don't doubt that he's correct, that I think that staff is going to be more than willing, before they actually send the language out to the residents, to talk with him as the applicant and try to come up with a proposal that best represents what both the city and the residents are seeking. Now, they may not be able to come to agreement on every issue, and what ultimately gets sent out might reflect some things that staff is recommending that the residents don't want. But I think certainly we can work through that process, in the meantime, unless the council feels a desire to see that language.
And I would just add, earlier I said February 5th. We have 90 days. It doesn't have to be February 5th. I think Paul is interested in moving this forward, and so I was working with him, trying to tell him that we could probably do it on the 5th, and so it doesn't have to be the 5th, and I don't know, Brian, do they have to specify when they want it brought back, or do we just bring it back in 90 days?
I think we can just bring it back when, I think staff can just address that with the council chair, as long as it's within that 90-day period. And I would say, I think as always, staff, I'm speaking for Cliff and Bryce, I'm sure staff wouldn't have any problem with sending you the draft language as it's being worked on to any council member who has interest in it, and addressing questions that you may have as we go along, so.
Thank you. I also would like to move forward with it. It was just a word of caution. I would hate for it to go through a public process, people be notified about it, and then the council finds that it's not something that we're willing to pass. And so I guess my one word of caution to the residents is, consider carefully. If you're only looking for the sign, Mr. Jones suggested that might be able to be handled administratively, and we wouldn't actually codify a parking permit program. If you do want a codified parking permit program, just understand that we need to balance the desires of the residents of those streets with the broader public interests, including, not distributing the cost of administering that program across all residents. So just my thoughts on that. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I will call for a vote on the implied motion. All in favor?
Sorry, before you vote, now that Bryce asked the question, I just looked at the resolution again, and the resolution actually says Municipal Council will hold a public hearing on February 5th, 2019 on the proposal described herein. I think we may want to have a motion to amend that to be a public hearing in accordance with the notice requirements of city code and remove the date.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sewell, and we have a second by Mr. Van Buren. So we are voting now on we are voting on the amendment, the motion to amend. All in favor? And that is unanimous. And so now with the implied motion amended, I'll call for a vote on the motion as amended. All in favor? Thank you, Mr. Jones. We appreciate you keeping us out of hot water. All right. Well, if there is no objection, we will now adjourn our meeting by unanimous consent. Thank you all.